Oakley dokley, it's time for the lesson of the day. You ready? Lesson 72. It's a long one. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Okay, so you're probably used to the course's language, those hairs, but just to kind of reframe again, since it just sounds so heavy, I'm just going to say it. Just holding resentments prevents me from getting happy, really. My source or creator's plan for my happiness and freedom. That's really what this is saying. Okay, so while we've recognized that the ego or my physical self's plan for salvation is the opposite of God's, we've not yet emphasized that it is an active attack on his plan. Also dramatic language, but let's just say it really prevents me from being happy, and it's a deliberate attempt to destroy it. This does get a little dramatic. I probably can't take that out, but we're going to go with it. In the attack, God has assigned the attributes which are actually associated with the physical self, while the ego appears to take on the attributes of God. And this gets really interesting because the ego really is the body, right? So the ego's fundamental wish is to replace God. In fact, the ego is the physical embodiment of that wish. So I guess we created the body so we could become God. For it is that wish that seems to surround the mind with a body, keeping it separate and alone, and unable to reach other minds except through the body that was made to imprison it. So obviously, we should be able to communicate, which, there's a lot of talk about the one mind, but we should be able to communicate without actually speaking, is this idea, which I think we can through energy a lot. We've just shut that down. In many ways, I always say I was a powerful empath, and really I can get around people and sort of feel what they're thinking and emoting. And so I think we probably can all do that because we're vibration and it's coming off of us. But okay, so it says the limit on communication cannot be the best means to expand communication, yet the ego would have you believe that it is. Although the attempt to keep the limitations that a body would impose is obvious here. Obviously, if you're in a body, you have to communicate like through a voice, not just mind to mind. It is perhaps not so apparent why holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. But let us consider the kinds of things you're apt to hold resentments for. Are they not always associated with something a body does? A person says something you do not like. He does something that displeases you. He betrays his hostile thoughts in his behavior. You are not dealing here with what the person is. On the contrary, you're exclusively concerned with what he does in a body. It's an interesting way. So you're not dealing here with what. It doesn't say who the person is. It says what the person is. It's interesting. You're exclusively concerned with what he does in a body. You are doing more than failing to help in freeing him from the body's limitations. You're actively trying to hold him to it by confusing it with him and judging them as one. Herein is God attacked, for if his son is only a body, so must he be as well. A creator wholly unlike his creation is inconceivable. So this is very interesting because it's basically pointing at the fact that someone can hurt us and that can suck, but we can still realize that there's something else. That's not who they are. That's not what they are. And I find it very interesting here that they flip and say, the ego is trying to take on the attributes of God and make God like a physical self. And I was thinking about Christianity, how interesting it is that the story of Jesus in mainstream Christianity is basically that Jesus became a body, and by having his body destroyed, people are saved. And that is very strange. I never really noticed that flip before. Like, if God is more than a body and truly the creator of the universe and everything, why would the death of a body save us? That's very strange. And so there I can see where the ego has flipped it, or the physical self, and said, hey, you need a physical body to save you, and taken the place of God. And this violence and blood that it focuses on so much has always really been very strange to me. It's so much death, and that there's supposed to be life or salvation in that has never really made a lot of logical sense to me, to be honest. And it's so interesting in this course that it's explaining why. That's the body trying to make itself into God by making your salvation from the death of a body, which is impossible if God isn't a body. So fascinating stuff, right? So if God is a body, it says here, what must his plan for salvation be? What could it be but death? And then again, you have this piece of Christianity and most religions that say, okay, salvation is at death. That is a big piece of it. When you die, you go to heaven. And so it doesn't really matter what you do in this life other than penance and being perfect, because when you die, that's your salvation. And so we do have salvation as death and not as life, even though Jesus, the whole thing with Christianity is that he didn't die and that was the salvation. We still haven't adapted that. We still think that death is salvation. We're still living that way, that there's a reward after death. And I think that's why so many people are willing to live so unhappily and aren't working harder to be happy in this life, because either they think it was all an accident, it doesn't matter anyway, which is difficult to generate a lot of happiness and hope from there, or we think it's okay because it happens after death, and so we just put it off. It's really interesting. So in trying to present himself as the author of life and not of death, he is a liar and a deceiver full of false promises and offering illusions in place of truth. And I get that. Like, why do we have to die if you claim you're all about life? It is a mixed message. The body's apparent reality makes this view of God quite convincing. It does, because the physical world seems more real to us at this time. In fact, if the body were real, it would be difficult indeed to escape this conclusion. And every grievance you hold insists that the body is real. It overlooks entirely what your brother is. It reinforces your belief that he's a body and condemns him for it. And it asserts that his salvation must be death, projecting this attack onto God and holding him responsible for it. To this carefully prepared arena where angry animals seek for prey and mercy cannot enter, the ego comes to save you. God made you a body. Very well. Let us accept this and be glad. As a body, do not let yourself be deprived of what the body offers. Take the little you can get. God gave you nothing. The body is your only savior. It is the death of God and your salvation. This is the universal belief of the world you see. Some hate the body and try to hurt and humiliate it. Others love the body and try to glorify and exalt it. But while the body stands at the center of your concept of yourself, you are attacking God's plan for salvation and holding your grievances against him and his creation, that you may not hear the voice of truth and welcome it as friend. Your chosen Savior takes his place instead. It is your friend. He is your enemy. We will try today to stop these senseless attacks on salvation. We will try to welcome it instead. Your upside-down perception has been ruinous to your peace of mind. You've seen yourself in a body and the truth outside you, locked away from your awareness by the body's limitations. Now we're going to try to see things differently. Cool. The light of truth is in us, where it was placed by God. It is the body that is outside us and is not our concern. That's weird. Let me read that. The light of truth is in us, where it was placed by God. It is the body that is outside us, and it is not our concern. That reminds me of a thing I read by Alan Watts that says some people have a theory that the universe is the shape of a body. Isn't that interesting? To be without a body is to be in our natural state. Fascinating. To recognize the light of truth in us is to recognize ourselves as we are. To see ourselves as separate from the body is to end the attack on God's plan for salvation and to accept it instead. To see ourselves as separate from the body is to end the attack on God's plan for salvation and to accept it instead. And wherever his plan is accepted, it is accomplished already. Our goal in the longer practice periods today is to become aware that God's plan for salvation has already been accomplished in us. To achieve this goal, we must replace attack with acceptance. As long as we attack it, we cannot understand what God's plan for us is. We are therefore attacking what we do not recognize. Now we're going to try to lay judgment aside and ask what God's plan for us is. What is salvation, Father? I do not know. Tell me that I may understand. Then we will wait in quiet for his answer. We have attacked God's plans for salvation without waiting to hear what it is. We have shouted our grievances so loudly that we have not listened to his voice. We've used our grievances to close our eyes and stop our ears. Now we would see and hear and learn. What is salvation, Father? Ask and you will be answered. Seek and you will find. We are no longer asking the ego what salvation is and where to find it. We are asking it of truth. Be certain then that the answer will be true because of whom you ask. Whenever you feel your confidence wane and your hope of success flicker and go out, repeat your question and your request, remembering that you are asking of the infinite creator of infinity who created you like himself. What is salvation, Father? I do not know. Tell me that I may understand. He will answer, be determined to hear. 1 or perhaps 2 shorter practice periods an hour will be enough for today, since they'll be somewhat longer than usual. These exercises should begin with this. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Let me accept it instead. What is salvation, Father? Then wait a minute or so in silence, preferably with your eyes closed, and listen for his answer. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Let me accept it instead. What is salvation, Father? All right, well, let's ask what salvation is. I like to reframe that as happiness or mental freedom. But let's see what answers we get as we ask today. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. It's a bit of a heavy one, a bit of a big one. I love thinking about seeing people beyond what's happening, like what's happening in the space. If they're whatever they're doing, that's not actually who they are. And that's the biggest thing for me, is to realize that we can be friends, we can love everyone, and know that something bigger is going on without getting caught up in the nitty-gritty of what's happening. I think that's so key. I've been really practicing any grievances that come up. I've been finding more coming up and just taking them into the light in the meditation. And I really have been accessing the light in me, which is wild. That's new. And in my meditation this morning, a lot did happen, and we weren't in bodies. It was sort of this inner world. So I'm a little mystified at this, saying we don't even really need bodies. So anyway, it's good stuff. Enjoy the lesson, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for being here.